Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive, a fascinating journey, really, straight inside the human mind. We're actually going to completely bypass that wrinkly outer cortex that gets all the limelight and travel way down into the dark, hardworking, and just wonderfully complex survival control room hidden right at the base of our brains. I'm talking about the brainstem and the diencephalon. Let's get into it.
So think about this for just a second. As you're sitting here right now, watching this explainer, processing visual info, listening to my voice, what exactly is regulating your heart rate? Like, what is keeping your breathing perfectly steady? You certainly aren't consciously choosing to do these things, right? You literally have an automatic, primitive, biological machine keeping you alive right this exact second. And it's doing it with absolute, unbelievable precision.
Okay, let's dive into this top-down elevator ride of a map we've got for today. Number 1, the master control room. Number 2, the diencephalon, or the homeostasis hub. 3, the midbrain, reflexes and relays. Number 4, the hindbrain, the survival center. And finally, number 5, nerves and nuclei, the wiring. Section 1, the master control room. Let's make our first stop and orient ourselves to exactly where this control room is actually located. So if you look at the architecture here, the brainstem is kind of like a stalk located at the very base of the brain. It sits anterior to, so just in front of, the cerebellum and extends all the way down into the spinal cord. Now the cerebrum, that massive upper part of the brain, it gets all the glory, right? It's where conscious thought happens. But this stalk, this is the unsung hero. It's the vital pathway connecting the cerebrum to the rest of the body, ferrying all those sensory and motor signals up and down, and silently managing the basic life functions you literally never have to think about. Moving right along to Section 2, diencephalon, the homeostasis hub. We're stepping off at the highest level of our tour here, located right above the midbrain. Okay, so the absolute primary mission of the diencephalon is a little thing called homeostasis. That's the constant, vital maintenance of stable internal bodily conditions. Honestly, think of it like your body's internal smart thermostat. If your internal environment gets too hot or too cold or starved of nutrients or dehydrated, well, you simply can't survive. Maintaining this incredibly delicate, invisible balance, that is the life's work of the diencephalon. And the absolute hardest worker in the diencephalon is this tiny, almost unassuming structure called the hypothalamus. I mean, just look at the massive amount of jobs this single regulatory center juggles. It controls your body temperature, your hunger, your thirst. But wait, it doesn't stop there. It also governs emotional behavior, and it acts as the absolutely crucial link between your nervous system and your endocrine system. How? By controlling the pituitary gland, which effectively dictates your body's entire hormonal activity. Not bad for a structure roughly the size of an almond, right? Sharing this space with the hypothalamus is the epithalamus. Now, this area contains the pineal gland. If you've ever wondered why you naturally feel tired at night, or why jet lag just absolutely wrecks you, it's regulated right here. The pineal gland manages our biological sleep-wake rhythms through melatonin production. And it does all this long before we even move down into the lower brain regions. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 3, midbrain, reflexes and relays, taking the elevator down a floor here. So sitting squarely between the diencephalon above and the hindbrain below, we have the midbrain, and it functions as this brilliant relay station. It essentially transmits information between those higher and lower brain regions. But, and this is key, it is definitely not just a passive cable. It is the primary coordinator for your alertness, your attention, your posture, and even your motor control. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how cleanly we can divide the midbrain into two distinct spatial halves that handle completely different tasks. On one side, we have the tectum, that's the dorsal or posterior part, and it handles sensory processing. And then on the other side, we have the tegmentum, the ventral or anterior part, which takes care of motor responses. Let's zoom in on the tectum first. It sits just above the cerebral aqueduct, and man, this area is all about rapid-fire reflexes. It's made up of the superior and inferior colliculi. So imagine you see a sudden flash of light out of the corner of your eye. Boom! The superior colliculi drive your visual reflexes and eye movements to look at it instantly. Or say you hear a loud, unexpected sound, like a door slamming. The inferior colliculi trigger your auditory reflexes. The tectum is literally processing these sensory inputs at absolute lightning speed. Then, sitting right below the tectum is the tegmentum. If the tectum is the thing receiving that sudden sensory input,
The tegmentum is what helps dictate the actual physical response. It houses the reticular formation and the red nucleus, so it's basically this major integrative center that grabs that sensory input and links it directly to motor responses. It's regulating your movement coordination, it's keeping you aroused and alert, and it's managing those baseline autonomic functions.
All right, Section 4, Hindbrain, the survival center. We're officially descending to the lowest level of our tour, down into the really primitive, non-negotiable survival mechanisms.
Okay, let's take a look at the three main components of the hindbrain. Notice the medulla oblongata right there at the top. This is the absolute lowest part of the brainstem, completely continuous with the spinal cord. And its functions, wow, they carry immense life-sustaining gravity. We're talking breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, swallowing, and basic reflexes like coughing. Without the medulla, basic survival is simply impossible. Moving up from there, we have the pons, and tucked right behind it, the cerebellum. Let's break those two down really quick.
So the pons literally acts as a bridge. Sitting just above the medulla, it structurally and functionally connects different parts of the brain, specifically linking the cerebrum up top to the cerebellum in the back. By relaying these crucial movement signals across this structural bridge, it plays a massive role in regulating things like sleep, arousal, and even respiration right alongside the medulla.
And then we have the cerebellum positioned just posterior to the pons. Think of it this way. When you reach out to grab your cup of coffee, it's your cerebrum that consciously decides to take the action. But it's your cerebellum that acts as the fine-tuning dial. It coordinates the voluntary movement, manages your balance and posture, and facilitates the motor learning required to make sure that motion is smooth and precise rather than all jerky and uncoordinated. Here's a fun fact for you. This is exactly why alcohol causes people to stumble and slur their words. The cerebellum is highly sensitive to it.
And that brings us to Section 5, nerves and nuclei, the wiring. Let's see how all of this actually talks to the body. You see, the brainstem is absolutely packed with the nuclei of many of our cranial nerves. Now, while these are technically defined as clusters of neuronal cell bodies, it's honestly best to just think of them as highly specialized processing centers. They take care of incredibly specific sensory and motor functions. Literally everything from your vision and hearing to your sense of taste, your facial movements, and autonomic control. It's all processed right here in these incredibly dense clusters. So the crucial point here is that these nuclei, they don't act alone. They have associated nerves that act as literal biological cables, physically carrying impulses to and from all the different parts of your body. This highly organized, ridiculously efficient wiring is exactly what allows the brainstem to seamlessly execute both our conscious choices, things like smiling or chewing, as well as our automatic survival reflexes.
Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. The word cortex, it actually comes from the Latin word for bark, literally like the bark of a tree. And structurally, that is exactly what it is. It's the outermost layer of your brain. In neuroscience, when we talk about the cortex, we're basically talking about the neocortex. This is the absolute most advanced part of the forebrain. This is the exact physical, biological hardware that gives us humans the ability to perform higher mental functions. Without this bark, there's no reasoning, no language, no complex perception, and no voluntary movement. It's literally the foundation of human intelligence. And just look at the sheer scale of this hardware. The neocortex makes up a staggering 80% of your total brain volume. Just think about that for a second. The vast majority of the real estate inside your skull is completely dedicated to this one highly advanced layer. While the other 20% handles your vital, baseline survival stuff, it's this massive volume of the neocortex that's directly linked to our incredibly advanced cognitive abilities. Basically, we have so much of it because, we need massive processing power. To truly understand how this amazing structure works, we're going to take a macro to micro tour today. We'll start by meeting the physical specs, check out the 4 brain lobes, see how we process the world, dig into the 6 hidden layers, map the brain, and finally, explore the connected command center.
So, Section 1. Meet your neocortex, the physical specs.
Before we talk about how it thinks, we really have to address a crazy physical paradox. 2,500 square centimeters. If you took your neocortex and somehow laid it completely flat, that's the total area it would cover. That is roughly the size of a fully opened newspaper. It's huge. But here's the fascinating part. This vast expanse of gray matter is astonishingly thin. It's only 1.5 to 3 millimeters thick. To put that into perspective, that's basically the thickness of a coin. So we've got this massive, sweeping sheet of incredibly thin biological tissue that somehow has to fit into a rigid, compact little skull. How does it fit? Well, the solution to that spatial paradox is one of nature's absolute greatest evolutionary tech upgrades: wrinkles. The cortex is highly folded into these peaks and valleys known as gyri and sulci. By aggressively folding the tissue in on itself, evolution found a genius way to cram massive surface area, and therefore millions and millions of additional neurons, right into your head. All those wrinkles exist for one reason: maximum processing capacity. The more surface area you can fold into the skull, the smarter the biological computer becomes. It's brilliant.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 4 brain lobes, the neighborhoods.
Now, what's really interesting about this is when we zoom in from that wrinkled surface, we find highly specialized working zones called lobes. Your neocortex isn't just some uniform bowl of soup. It's divided into incredibly distinct neighborhoods. And look at how specific these jobs are. You've got the frontal lobe handling voluntary movement, planning, and your highest level thinking. Actually, fun fact, your frontal lobe specifically planned for you to sit down and learn from this explainer today. Then, right behind it, you have the parietal lobe, processing sensory info and giving you spatial awareness. Down on the sides, the temporal lobe handles hearing, memory, and language. And right at the back of your head, the occipital lobe, whose primary job is processing vision. Everything has its specific place.
Section 3. Processing the world, the information highway.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because how do these lobes actually process all that raw data? Well, it happens in a really elegant 3-step flow. This is literally how your brain makes sense of reality. Step 1 happens in the primary areas. These guys receive raw, direct sensory input, like the actual visual data of your environment hitting your occipital lobe. Step 2 happens in the secondary areas. They sit right next door to the primary areas and start interpreting that raw data, giving it some basic meaning and organization. And finally, Step 3 happens in the tertiary or association areas. This right here is where the magic of human intelligence happens. These areas take that organized data and integrate it across multiple regions, turning it into complex meaning, long-term memory, focused attention, and high-level planning. It goes from a raw signal to organized data to a fully complex human thought.
Which brings us to Section 4, the 6 hidden layers, the microwiring.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens if we peel back the cortex and zoom in microscopically. We see that this tiny 3-millimeter thick gray matter is highly structured. The neocortex is built of 6 distinct layers of neurons stacked right on top of each other, and they have incredibly specific jobs. Layer 4 is the primary input layer. It's designed to receive that incoming sensory data we just talked about. Layers 5 and 6, those are the output layers. Their job is to send electrical signals away from the cortex to other brain areas, or even all the way down to your muscles. And sitting pretty on top are layers 1, 2, and 3, the association layers. They do all the internal processing, communicating up and down the column. Together, these 6 structural layers create a perfectly efficient loop. Receive input, process it internally, generate an output. It is microscopic wiring at its absolute finest.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, Mapping the Brain, Brodmann's Areas.
So, back in the early 20th century, neurobiologist Corbinian Brodmann mapped these microscopic cellular differences, a whole field known as cytoarchitecture, across the entirety of the cortex. And look at this comparison here. On the left, we have Area 4, the primary motor cortex. On the right, Area 17, the primary visual cortex. Now, even though both are made of the exact same gray matter neocortex, the variations in their microscopic cell structure completely dictate their function. Area 4's cell structure is perfectly optimized to control your body's physical movement, while Area 17's structure is exclusively designed to process what you see. The architecture perfectly dictates the action, no exceptions.
Moving to our final piece of the puzzle, Section 6, the Connected Command Center, tying it all together.
So how does this highly localized, densely layered system actually talk to itself to function as one unified, brilliant mind? Well, it all comes down to the wiring. The neocortex relies on 3 distinct networking pathways to integrate data. First up, you have short connections that bounce signals rapidly within a single lobe. Second, you have these long connections that act like massive fiber optic cables. They transmit data super fast between entirely different lobes. Like, say, sending info from your visual cortex in the back all the way up to your frontal lobe so you can make a decision. And third, you have commissures. These are the massive bridges that connect the left hemisphere of your brain to the right. These 3 pathways ensure the seamless integration of information across your whole brain, supporting literally everything from basic survival reflexes to the most complex human behaviors and emotions.
So the crucial point is this: the neocortex really is the most advanced part of the brain. It's capable of insanely complex processing, integration, and truly intelligent behavior. Everything we've covered today, the massive surface area folded up into your skull, the specialized functional lobes, the sophisticated 6-layer microwiring, and the vast networking connections, all of it serves as the literal, physical foundation for human reasoning. Your entire conscious experience is built right on top of this elegant biological architecture.
We're going to explore exactly what happens when the lines of communication inside your head are literally cut.
At the center of all this is a cute little bridge of fibers called the corpus callosum. And this tiny structure is really the only thing preventing our brain from processing the world in two completely separate chunks. Think of it like a massive, high-speed fiber optic cable bridging the left and right hemispheres of your brain. Every single second, millions of signals are firing across this bridge. It makes sure that what your right eye sees, your left hand can react to, and what you feel can be described out loud with words. Without this critical bundle of fibers doing its job, our internal teamwork just totally falls apart, leading to some of the most mind-bending syndromes in medical history.
So, here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, split brain, the unseen key. Number 2, alien hand, the rebel limb. Number 3, alexia, writing without reading. And finally, number 4, the fragmented mind.
All right, diving into section 1, split brain. What happens when the bridge falls?
Okay, so here's a wild fact. If a split-brain patient sees something only in their left visual field, the language center in their left hemisphere literally has no clue it's even there. Here is how that works. In a typical brain, our left hemisphere is the talker. It houses our primary language centers. But human wiring is crossed. The left visual field, meaning everything you see to the left of your center of vision, is actually processed by the right hemisphere. Normally, no big deal, right? The right hemisphere just zips a message across that corpus callosum bridge to the left side saying, "Hey, I see a dog," and you verbally say the word dog. But in split brain syndrome, which happens when that bridge is surgically cut in a procedure called a colossotomy, that message just never arrives.
So this brings up a seriously mind-bending question. It's one that was famously explored in the classic absolute game-changer studies by neuroscientists Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga. If the talking part of your brain has zero idea what the looking part of your brain is seeing, how do you pick up what you can't technically see? Like, how does the body react when the left hand literally does not know what the right hand is doing?
Well, Sperry and Gazzaniga ran an amazing experiment to test exactly this. They flashed the word key purely to the left visual field of a split-brain patient. Now remember, that visual data goes straight to the right hemisphere, and since the bridge is gone, the left hemisphere, the talking part, gets absolutely nothing. So when the researchers asked, "Hey, what did you see?" the patient would verbally reply, "I saw nothing," because to the language center, there was nothing. But then the researchers asked the patient to reach out with their left hand, which is controlled by that visually aware right hemisphere, and pick up the object they just saw from a hidden pile. And without any hesitation, the left hand grabbed the key. The right hemisphere knew the answer the whole time, it just didn't have a mouth to say it.
Moving right along to section 2, alien hand, the rebel limb. What happens when your body fights back?
Just imagine the incredibly unsettling feeling of your own arm taking on a life of its own, playfully or sometimes stubbornly, just ignoring your commands. This is an actual condition called alien hand syndrome. It happens when there's a callosal lesion, basically damage to the corpus callosum from a stroke, a tumor, or an injury, that causes a severe loss of coordination between the hemispheres. The result? One hand begins to execute complex, goal-directed actions totally independent of your conscious will. And let's be clear, we are not talking about a muscle spasm or a twitch. The hand is actually doing things on purpose. It's just not your purpose. To put that into perspective, take this real-life case of a woman who literally had to fight her own left hand just to get dressed in the morning. She was recovering from colossal surgery, and she'd stand in front of the mirror, actively using her conscious, dominant right hand to button up her shirt for the day. But at the exact same time, her left hand, controlled by that disconnected, rebellious right hemisphere, would just reach up and start unbuttoning the shirt right behind it. Her two hands were quite literally engaged in a tug-of-war over her wardrobe.
It's deeply spooky. It almost feels supernatural to the patients experiencing it. As this specific patient described it, and this is a chilling quote, "It was as if the hand had a mind of its own." Which really forces us to pause and ask, well, if you aren't controlling the hand, who is? The wild answer is that a part of your own brain is controlling it. It just happens to be a part of the brain you can no longer actively communicate with. It's an incredibly frustrating and honestly terrifying daily reality for these patients.
Let's move to section 3, alexia, writing without reading, the tragic letter.
Okay, to understand this next bizarre condition, which is called alexia without agraphia, we have to quickly pull apart two concepts that are usually glued together. Alexia is the loss of the ability to read, usually from brain damage. Agraphia is the loss of the ability to write. Now, normally, if you damage your language center, these two go hand in hand. If you can't read words, you generally can't produce written words either. But when a highly specific part of the brain's internal bridge gets damaged, you get something totally different. Alexia without agraphia.
Take a look at this truly heartbreaking case of a 62-year-old teacher who developed this exact syndrome. Her ability to write was perfectly intact. She could sit down at her desk and beautifully craft long, eloquent sentences, proving her language production centers were working flawlessly. But the very second she put her pen down and tried to read the exact sentence she had just authored, she couldn't do it. The words on the page literally looked like complete gibberish to her.
So how does that even happen? Well, the anatomy of this severed connection is incredibly precise. This teacher suffered a dual strike. First, she had damage to her left occipital cortex, which is the part that processes vision on the left side. Second, she had accompanying damage to the back part of her corpus callosum. Because of this exact combo, visual information from the world could enter her brain, but it was totally blocked from ever reaching the language areas safely tucked away in her intact left hemisphere. She had the words perfectly stored in her mind to write them out, but her eyes literally could not deliver the visual text back to the language center to be decoded.